Welcome to If the Truth Be Told, a space of honest conversations, deep faith, and finding clarity in a noisy world. Here is your host, Reverend Dr. Faulk.
Thank you, Jack. Folks, I'm so glad that you joined us today on this podcast. We're here today. This is our first podcast, and I'm Pastor Clay Faulk, and I am so glad you're here with us. Today, we're going to talk about Red Bank Fellowship Church and why we are sitting here doing this podcast and sort of how we started, the genesis, if you will, of our church. Let me start a little farther back. Red Bank United Methodist Church was a church sitting in the Red Bank, Lexington, South Carolina area for many, many, many decades. And it had been a small Mill Hill church in the beginning and grown. And they built another building that they were in for many, many years. And around the 1990s, 2000, they built a bigger, larger, beautiful sanctuary. And after they did that, back in 2020, I was appointed to be the pastor there. And I got there, and I've been a pastor for over 30 years. My background is I'm originally from Fort Bragg, Fayetteville, North Carolina area. My dad was military and had gotten out of World War II and stayed in that area. And long story short, ended up growing up in that area for the most part, moved around quite a bit later in my teen years. Went into ministry May 7th, 1994. I felt like the Lord had called me to ministry after being in banking for a few years, and went to seminary at Columbia Theological Seminary in Atlanta, Georgia. First church I served was in Florence, South Carolina. Was an associate pastor there, and then ended up moving to a couple of different churches over the years. Spent 12 years down in Texas at one particular church. And in 2017, went to Lee Road United Methodist in Greenville and the Taylors area. So I got appointed in 2020 to be the pastor at Red Bank. Got there, met the folks, fell in love with the folks, just wonderful people. Loved the Lord, loved the scriptures. And so we started talking about the issue of leaving the United Methodist Church. And the more we talked about it, the more we said, well, our issue to start with, after we did some seminars and sat down with different groups of people, different times, we met and talked about it. We're going to wait and see what happens, was the consensus. We had a few folks said leave, but when it came down to buying our way out of the church, we were asked for a 10% drawdown on the value of the church. And so it was going to be well over $200,000 to $300,000. And our church wasn't ready to do that. So basically at that point, we waited to see what 2024 held. And the Charlotte Convention in 2024 happened, and they made some decisions that our congregation was not, they were not in approval of. And certainly when it comes to sexuality and issues such as that, that was what spurred the church to seek an exit. So after we filled out all our paperwork and got ready to exit, which, by the way, the United Methodist Church told us time and time again that we could certainly exit when we were ready, that they would not hold us against our will, and that there was no, quote, sunset on the idea of leaving the United Methodist Church and becoming a global Methodist church. So we were waiting around, like I said, till 2024, and that's when things changed. So in October of 2024, we had our charge conference in the first part of the month. At the time, the district superintendent came and spoke to us and told us that we were leaving and understood we were leaving and was gracious and kind. And so there we were, getting ready to go. We were going to be leaving at the next annual conference in June of 2025. So all seemed well until the end of that month. October of 2024, the Judiciary Committee of the United Methodist Church decided that they weren't letting any other churches leave for no reason, zero reason. We don't care what they promised you. We don't care what they've said. Nobody's leaving. And so we ended up in a situation where we were heartbroken. What do? We don't agree with the changes in the United Methodist Church, and we had told them that, and it was very clear we were wanting to leave, and they didn't grandfather us in, and basically went back on their word. They reneged, whatever you want to call it, they lied. Whether they can put it off and say it was somebody else's fault, but the bottom line was, on a national scale, the United Methodist Church stopped letting any church leave, especially here in South Carolina, where there had been a previous time when people were able to leave. But our bishop would not allow that to be done during that period of time. And so basically what it came down to was churches were choosing to, according to the Book of Discipline, leave, technically close, but then reopen as a different denomination. But at this point, we had followed all the rules, had done all the things asked of us, and here we were stuck with a situation where they were telling us we could not buy our building. And so some of the members that are now members of the Red Bank Fellowship Church, some of the folks got together and they said, we want to start a new church, and we want to leave where we are and start anew. And so they started that process, and by March of 2025, a group of folks met just before the first Sunday of March and said, we're going to meet next Sunday in Saxagoth Elementary School, and we're going to have our first worship services. Would anybody like to come? They had a meeting on a Sunday night, and at that time, they had not even talked to me about being their pastor. I think we had talked about the possibility, but they didn't know how many people were going to show up at the meeting. They had no idea. So basically, at that point, I remember they had a meeting, and they had about 170 some folks show up, and they realized they weren't going to have enough to start a church. And the next that night, they called me and said, "Would you be interested in looking at this?" The next day, we worked out the details, and I sent a resignation to the United Methodist Church on that Tuesday morning. So that's sort of how we got here, and it has been a wonderful journey in so many. Been a little bit scary, but it's been a faith journey. And for our church, the faith journey is still in progress. We meet every Sunday at 9:30 and 11 at Saxagoth Elementary, and we have contemporary services. We have a band, and pretty much the entire band that was at the previous church came with us and has just done a wonderful job of leading worship during that 9:30 hour. We've had great attendance at both services. The traditional service, the choir director, the accompanist from the previous church also came, and the entire choir came with us from the previous church. And so we have wonderful traditional services at 11 a.m. every Sunday, led by a wonderful group of folks. So that's been a huge blessing, and it's just been amazing. We have bought property on Highway 6, just south of Red Bank, just on the other side, going towards Pillion on the left-hand side, right on the Congaree Creek area. And so we're going to be building a church very shortly, starting hopefully before the summer ends. We'll break ground, we're hoping. But all that to be said, this has been a faith journey. I was literally just talking to somebody, and we were talking about the fact that there was never a time when these folks said that they were going to do anything but stick together and follow God's will. And that really is what it's about. Last week, I preached a message on Matthew 16, and I talked about the fact that when it really comes down to it, the entirety of the Bible is geared towards one question: who do you say that I am? Jesus says to each and every person. He says that to Peter, but he says it to you and to me and to everybody you've ever known. Who do you say that I am? And as we start this podcast, we're going to talk about all kind of issues. the genesis of how we got this podcast started is because we believe there needs to be an outlet of information, just a time to talk about issues outside of worship, for you to be able to click on this podcast anytime you choose. Yeah, hopefully you will choose. And you will be able to hear a biblical perspective on issues of the day. And hopefully, out of all that we talk about, we're going to talk about lots of different topics over the next, I don't know, hopefully weeks to come. We will be talking about issues and how the Bible and how your faith connect to those issues. And maybe the perspective, you may agree with some things, you may not agree. That's certainly something that's up to you. I'm not here to try to convince anybody to believe anything. I'm just going to tell you what I think, what I believe, and some of this will be my opinion. So don't get me wrong, it'll be my opinion. But at the same time, we're seeking the truth. The truth. What is true? You can say it's objective, it's subjective, but there's biblical truth and there's not biblical truth. And I've heard people spin what they said was biblical truth. I've heard people spin, both conservative and liberal. I've heard all kind of spin, and we're going to try to get rid of some of the spin. We're going to try to talk about some issues that affect everyday human beings, from politics to anything else, sports, any subject you want to talk about. We're willing to talk about it. So, on this particular beginning day, I invite you to join us in future podcasts to hear exactly what we're talking about, the subject, and maybe you'll have a guest or two that will add some interest to you, that might be somebody who's a local figure in the area, or even somebody who's national. So tune in with us and see what you think about our podcast on that day. I'm Clay Faulk. I'm the pastor at Red Bank Fellowship Church. Been in ministry over 30 years plus, actually. And I look forward to seeing you on future podcasts. God bless, and talk to you soon.